My girlfriend smiled and said, I used your social security number to open store cards. They're offering great discounts. I took the cards, walked out, and filed the fraud reports without arguing. That Saturday, the card reader declined her twice before she looked up and saw me standing there. She was smiling when she said it. She thought she'd done something good. The worst kind of betrayal isn't when someone uses you to hurt you. It's when they use you without even realizing they had to ask. By the time you're hearing this, the fraud reports have been filed with all 3 credit bureaus. The police report has been logged, and Amber has learned that great discounts don't come free after all. But to understand how we got here, you need to hear how it started. Let me take you back to that Tuesday afternoon, the moment I stood completely still in a cafe doorway and felt something inside me go very, very quiet. I'm Yancey Sterling, 30 years old, IT consultant working remote from a 1-bedroom apartment in a city that rewards people who read the fine print. I spend my days reviewing contracts before I sign them, running through system checks nobody asked me to run, and keeping detailed records of what I've agreed to and what I haven't. That's how I'm built. I like knowing exactly what I'm looking at. Amber Collins and I had been together for 20 months. She was 27, managed a part-time position at a boutique retail store, and ran an Instagram account about lifestyle and deals, finding the best version of everything on a budget, stretching every dollar, maximizing every purchase. She laughed louder than anyone else in the room and thought 3 steps ahead about the wrong things. How to get the best table, which rewards card earned the most points per dollar, how to engineer a situation to work in her favor before you'd notice she was doing it. I read that as ambition. I was misreading the chart. There were 2 things before the cafe that I filed away and didn't look at again. 6 months earlier, I found a package on my doorstep I hadn't ordered. My Amazon account showed 3 purchases I didn't recognize: skincare products, a candle, a piece of kitchenware. When I brought it up, Amber said, I figured since we're basically together all the time, it's kind of like a shared account now. She paid me back for all of it. 3 months after that, she borrowed my debit card for what she called just a coffee and a couple things. It came back at $180. She paid me back within the week, every cent. I told myself people in relationships share things. I told myself this was normal. That Tuesday, I drove to the cafe to pick her up from lunch with her friends, and I heard her laughing before I even opened the door. The cafe had round tables pushed close to the back wall, and the afternoon light was coming in sideways through the front windows, cutting across the room in long flat stripes. Amber and 4 of her friends were in the corner, drinks in front of them, shopping bags from somewhere hanging off the backs of their chairs. The accumulated energy of a Saturday that had been planned in advance. I could hear her before I was fully through the door. And the points stack, she was saying. So we're already ahead before we even swipe one time. I stepped inside. She was holding something in her hand, a small fan of cards, held the way someone holds a poker hand they're proud of. I recognized the store names from the credit alert notifications I'd been dismissing for 4 straight days, the ones I'd assumed were phishing attempts and ignored. I said, Amber, what are those? She looked up, and her face did what it always did when she thought she had good news: lit up, expectant, certain of the reception. Oh, perfect timing. I was just telling everyone. She held the cards out toward me. I figured out a hack for us. You know those alerts you've been getting on your phone? I looked at the cards, then at her. What about them? That was me, she said, smiling. I used your social security number to open store cards. They're offering great discounts. She said it the way someone says they found parking on a busy street. Bright. Pleased. Already halfway to the next sentence. I stood just inside that doorway and felt something inside me go completely quiet. Not angry. Not yet. Something colder and more precise. The part of me that pulls up a blank document and starts measuring exactly what it's looking at. When exactly did you do that? I asked. Last week. I wanted to surprise you first. The points program alone is worth it. And the annual. I set my keys down on the edge of the nearest empty table. Amber. She stopped. One of her friends, the one sitting directly across from me, had stopped smiling and was looking between us with an expression she hadn't prepared for. I was going to tell you everything, Amber said, her voice recalibrating downward. I just wanted to have it all set up first so I could show you the numbers. We're basically going to be married anyway, Yancey. It's not like I was stealing from a stranger. I looked at her. I looked at her friends, who were looking at me. I looked back at her. Give me those cards, I said. Why are you? Give me the cards, Amber. She handed them over. I put them in my jacket pocket and didn't explain, because there was nothing to explain yet. I was still measuring. I walked out of that cafe the way I walked in, drove home alone, and didn't say a word for the rest of the night. Trevor Shaw was 32 years old and had been a loan officer at Westfield Community Bank for 6 years. We'd known each other since sophomore year of college, and that evening, I called him not because I had a plan, but because he was the only person in my life who understood numbers the way I did, not as feelings, but as facts with weight and consequence. I told him what happened. I told him the exact sentence she'd used. He was quiet for a few seconds. Then he said, "Yancey, that's identity theft. That's a federal offense, and it doesn't matter that she's your girlfriend. She said she was going to pay for everything," I told him. "That is not how the law works," Trevor said, very evenly. "How many accounts did she open?" I didn't know the exact number. I'd counted 3 cards, but there had been more alerts than that. "Give me 5 minutes," he said. "I can pull your credit revenue report right now from the system here. You need to see the full picture before you decide anything." He pulled it. There were 5 accounts I hadn't known about. I sat in my apartment and listened to him read through them one by one. And somewhere in the middle of the third one, I felt the cold inside me sharpen into something purposeful. By the time we hung up, I knew Trevor had the professional tools to help me do this correctly. I wasn't going to do anything reckless. Over the next 2 days, Trevor walked me through the process. I filed fraud alerts with all 3 credit bureaus. I contacted each card issuer with the police report number attached to my documentation. I also had a brief call with a lawyer I knew professionally enough to confirm that I had every right to file, that my actions were entirely within the law, and that I'd already done most of what needed to be done. Amber texted me Wednesday morning. "Are you okay? You seemed really weird after the cafe." I read it and set my phone back down. I slept well that week. I made coffee before my first call each morning, went on a walk at lunch, sent a client proposal I'd been finishing for 2 weeks. I was calm in the specific way you get calm when you have a list and you're working through it one item at a time, and the list is good. I hadn't flagged the issuers to deny at point of sale, only to document and hold. The mechanism was intact and in place. The mall where she'd opened the most accounts was 3 blocks from where her friend group liked to spend their Saturdays. She had a shopping trip planned. I hadn't canceled anything yet. Saturday, 2:15 in the afternoon. Westfield Mall's main atrium was the kind of open space where sound traveled. You could hear a register transaction go wrong 2 stores away if you were paying attention. Seasonal sale banners ran the full length of the central corridor, red and white, and the overhead lights turned the polished marble floor into something close to a mirror. Amber was standing outside the 3rd store on the left, one hand, holding a small shopping bag, the other already reaching toward her wallet. 4 of her friends were arranged around her, the same group from the cafe, dressed like this Saturday had been on the calendar for weeks. She was talking and laughing, her face completely relaxed. She had no idea what the card reader was about to tell her. "She hasn't seen us yet," Trevor said quietly, just to my right. I said, "I know." Trevor moved first. He was 6 feet tall, and he walked the way people walk when they're used to being in rooms where something important is happening, steady, unhurried, not checking to see if anyone was watching him. He had on a collared shirt and dark pants, nothing that announced anything about who he was. But the moment he stepped out from the food court entrance and began crossing through the crowd toward the store corridor, 2 people nearby instinctively looked up from what they were doing. That's a thing that happens with certain people, not because they're loud or dramatic, but because their certainty takes up space. He moved through the Saturday afternoon crowd, like a man with an appointment, and I followed 2 steps behind him. Brooke spotted me before I'd taken 10 steps into the corridor. She was standing slightly apart from the group, holding a cup from one of the food court kiosks, and when she saw my face, her expression started to form a smile and stopped halfway through. She opened her mouth slightly. I shook my head, one small motion. She stayed where she was. Amber's back was to us when we came within range. She was at the point-of-sale terminal, card already in the cashier's hand, laughing at something one of her friends had just said. The cashier ran the card. The machine made a flat tone, not quite a beep, more of a dead sound that cashiers recognize before their customers do. Amber's laughter dropped by half. She said something I couldn't fully hear, probably try it again, and the small crease of confusion appeared between her eyebrows as the cashier made a second attempt. The second decline landed. Amber looked down at the card in the cashier's hand. Then she looked up and scanned the space automatically, and she found me standing 8 feet away. I watched it cross her face in 3 distinct moves. The confusion of not expecting me here, the slower recognition that settled in like a key turning in a lock. And then the third thing, which arrived a beat after the other two, and stayed something that was not quite fear and not quite shame, but lived precisely in the space between them. I stepped to within 2 feet of the terminal. "The card is frozen," I said. "They all are," Amber said. "Yancy, why would you do that?" "I filed a fraud report on Thursday. All 5 accounts are flagged. I was going to pay for everything. You didn't have to make this into a whole situation. I had a plan. I had it all worked out. You opened accounts in my name without my knowledge or my consent," I said. "That is identity theft. It does not matter what your plan was. I had every legal right to file." She looked at me with something I couldn't entirely name, part disbelief, part the beginning of understanding that she was not going to be able to reframe this into something manageable. The friend standing to her left, the one with the large canvas tote bag, took a visible half-step backward, quietly placing herself outside the immediate situation. The cashier had both hands flat on the counter and was holding very, very still. "We can work this out," Amber said. Her voice had changed. The certainty from the cafe was gone, replaced by something thinner, something that was working hard to sound reasonable. "This doesn't have to become some whole. You told me in front of all your friends," I said. "You smiled when you said it. I can still see your face when you said it." She had no answer to that. The truth sat between us in full view of everyone at that terminal, and there was nothing left for her to do with it. The store manager came out from the back. The cashier had signaled her. She was brisk and efficient, the practiced energy of someone who had dealt with flagged transactions before and didn't need the situation explained. Trevor stepped forward and produced a business card from his wallet. "I'm a loan officer with Westfield Community Bank," he said, handing it to her. "The accounts on these cards were opened without the cardholder's authorization or knowledge. There's a police report reference number on file if your loss prevention team needs it." The manager looked at his card. She looked at me. She looked at Amber. Amber turned to me one more time. "You filed a police report on me?" "I filed a police report documenting a crime that was committed against me," I said. That was the moment. The moment the narrative left her hands and settled somewhere she couldn't reach. The manager asked Amber to step into the back office to discuss the transaction. Amber stood at the entrance for one more second. The cards were still in her hand, all 5 of them, all declined, the great discounts gone silent. Her friends had drifted to a careful distance behind her, nobody close. She looked at me one last time and said, "I just wanted us to save money." The manager said her name. Amber turned and followed her through the door. Trevor drove me home. We didn't talk much on the way. He asked once if I was all right. I said yes, and after that we were both quiet. He dropped me off and said he'd follow up on Monday with whatever the card issuers came back with. 2 days later, on Monday morning, I got a text from Brooke. She'd been the one standing in the atrium with the food court cup, the one who hadn't stepped backward but hadn't stepped forward either. The message said, "I didn't know it was like that. I'm sorry." I read it. I set my phone face down on my desk and went back to the file I'd had open. Later that afternoon, Trevor called. The card issuers had logged the police report. The dispute process was open and moving. My credit, he said, would be fully restored once the fraudulent accounts were resolved. He'd seen this process before. He knew the timeline. He wasn't worried. I hadn't won anything. I had just stopped bleeding. My attorney consultation was scheduled for Monday morning. I had a proposal revision due to a client in Atlanta by end of week. I added both to my calendar in order of deadline, closed the app, and looked at what came next. The calls started that same Saturday evening, before I was even back in my own neighborhood. I didn't pick up. By Sunday, there were texts, long ones, multiple screens. The first said she had planned to tell me everything, that she was going to make it right, that the discounts were real and the math proved we would have saved significant money together. The second said I had overreacted. The third said that filing a police report on your girlfriend was not something a person did if they actually loved someone. I read all of them. I responded to none of them. On Tuesday, Sandra Sterling called my mother, who does not typically phone in the middle of a workday. "Amber reached out to me," she said. "She says this is all a misunderstanding." "Mom," I said. "She opened credit accounts using my social security number without asking me. That's a federal offense." A pause. "Oh," my mother said. She did not call Amber back. The practical consequence of that call was that everyone who mattered to me now heard what had happened directly from me, stated plainly in 4 sentences to someone who understood exactly what the words meant, not from Amber's version, not filtered through anyone's interpretation. By reaching out to my family, Amber had handed me that, and she'd also confirmed that she still didn't understand what she'd done because the version she was distributing described it as a misunderstanding. A week after the mall, she posted something on her Instagram story, vague enough to deny later, specific enough that anyone who knew her understood exactly who she was talking about. Something about being betrayed by the person you trusted most. Something about realizing people aren't who you think they are. The friends who had been at that terminal Brooke included knew what had actually happened. None of them commented on the post. 2 weeks after the mall, Trevor texted me while I was on a remote work call. I read it after I'd finished. The issuers have been in touch with her directly. Just so you know. I set my phone down on the desk and looked at the wall for a moment. What Trevor explained the following day over the phone was this. Because Amber's address had been listed as secondary contact on each of the fraudulent applications, the card issuer's fraud departments had reached out to her directly as part of their investigation process. The accounts hadn't simply been closed and removed. They were being processed as identity theft claims, which meant her name and her address were now attached to a fraud investigation record, documented, flagged, on file. I found out the specific consequence on a Thursday morning while I was making coffee before a 9 o'clock call. Trevor had mentioned it the evening before, almost as an afterthought. The store where Amber had been holding the declined cards that Saturday, the one she always called her favorite, the one that appeared in at least a third of her Instagram content, had flagged her name in their internal loss prevention system. Not a formal ban, just the kind of quiet notation that surfaces automatically when someone returns to open a new account or presents a form of payment the system recognizes. She could walk into that store and never know she was in a database. I finished making my coffee and stood at the kitchen counter for a minute, holding the mug. The thing she'd wanted most was beginning to close around her. I didn't dwell on it. I had a call in 3 minutes. On the Thursday evening after Trevor's text, I made dinner at home for the first time in months without thinking about whether I should tell someone where I was. I made pasta, something simple, and I ate it at my desk while I reviewed a contract draft for a new client. The contract was with a logistics company out of Atlanta, larger scope than anything I'd taken on before, the kind of engagement I'd been keeping room open for. At some point during dinner, I logged into my bank portal and checked my credit score. The number had moved, not all the way back yet, but moving the way things move when the pressure holding them down has been lifted and they're finding their natural level again. I finished eating. I washed the bowl. I closed the laptop. The apartment was quiet in a way it hadn't been in 20 months, not the quiet of an empty room, not the quiet of something waiting to be filled, just quiet. The kind that belongs entirely to one person who is exactly where they decided to be. 2 months later, I was at a narrow coffee shop near my office on a Wednesday morning, exposed brick walls, a single long communal table running the length of the room, the kind of place that fills with laptop workers by 9 and clears by noon. I had my computer open and a second coffee in hand, and I was not thinking about Amber at all when Brooke came through the front door. She saw me at the same moment I saw her. She stopped, then came over. "Do you mind?" she said. "No," I said. She sat down across from me and ordered something from the counter. For the first few minutes, we talked about nothing in particular, how the summer had been, a neighborhood she'd been spending time in. Then she set her cup down with both hands and looked at the table between us, and I waited. "She's been trying to open her own credit cards," Brooke said. "The regular kind, in her own name. She's gotten denied, I think 3 times now. Maybe 4. I didn't say anything. The investigation, whatever it officially gets called, it left something on her record. Not criminal, but when she applies somewhere the issuers can see it, and they're flagging it automatically. Her score took a hit through the whole dispute process." Brooke paused. "The store. The one at the mall. She went back a few weeks ago and tried to open a store account there, because that's what she does, and it came back flagged." She picked up her cup again and held it with both hands. She looked tired, not sleep-deprived tired, more the tired of someone who'd been the only reasonable person in a complicated situation for 2 months and was starting to feel the weight of it. "She said something to me last week," Brooke continued. She took a small breath before she said it. She said, "I didn't think it would be that serious. I thought he'd understand eventually. Not, I know what I did was wrong. Not, I understand what I put him through. Just, I didn't think it would be that serious." I set my coffee cup down on the table. Something in my chest released, not triumph, not the satisfaction of having won, more the specific sensation of setting down a weight you've been carrying so long, you forgot it had a shape. I had been as serious as the situation required. The outcome had confirmed it. "Thanks for telling me," I said. Brooke nodded. She looked out the front window at the street for a moment. We sat there a little while longer without saying much. Then I finished my coffee, packed up my laptop, and walked out into a Wednesday morning that had nothing to do with any of it. 3 weeks after the coffee shop, I signed the Atlanta contract. It was the largest single engagement I'd taken on 4 months of work, defined deliverables, a client who understood exactly what they were paying for. I built the project timeline that afternoon, put it on my calendar, and felt the particular satisfaction of a thing that will deliver precisely what you put into it. 2 days after that, I applied for a credit card of my own. Clean application, full documentation, approved the same day. The bureaus had completed their review. The fraudulent accounts were resolved. My score was back the exact number I'd worked to maintain, returned to me and mine. I'm not wiser than I was before this happened. I don't understand people better than I did 20 months ago. What I am is the version of myself that existed before I spent that time, assuming that loving someone means they will not treat what you trust them with as a resource. That version doesn't need much explaining. That version is simply free.